So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on diversity. I do want to let you know that, they always say, talk about what you know. So I'll be talking about diversity from a human resources perspective. And I really do believe strongly in grassroots efforts. And so in our organization, I've been very appreciative of the fact that a lot of our employees feel very strongly about diversity, but we're sort of in different labs and different groups. We all do, those of us who really care a lot about this subject, do diversity around the edges of our regular jobs. And so I've been really, really excited to work with a very talented group of people, including Rebecca, Cindy Worcester's very active in diversity, Brian Bevert, a lot of us, Stephanie, really, really care about this. And I would say one thing that we have in common is we're kind of risk takers. We're a little bit rabble-rousers. We really do like to kind of step out there and say, what would happen if? And so I'll talk a little bit today about a couple of ideas that kind of came out of just very informal grassroots discussions. And, the Nike expression, just do it. Sometimes I just get really tired of focus groups and brainstorming and committee work that goes on and on and on for years. And you think, well, come on, let's do something. So I've sort of just jumped out there and done it, and nobody seemed to object, and my supervisor didn't, ding me on my performance appraisal or anything. I would say we're all consensus builders. I think here in our organization, we really do respect each other for what we bring to the table. And so we really like to come together and build on each other's ideas. And I've noticed this especially in the NCAR Diversity Committee. We've got pretty high-level people on that committee. We're trying to get a representative of each lab, but it seems like over the years, there's a core group that really, really works well together. And one thing we've learned is the simplest solution is often the most effective. So we do take small steps, and I like to think they lead to big gains. Key ingredients to successful recruiting, and so I do come from an HR background. My job primarily for the last almost 19 years has been in the employment arena. And for years and years and years, I read every resume of every applicant for every job. So I've sort of watched hiring processes. I've had a front row seat. And I do think, for years we would place ads for our open positions on the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, for example, or Society of Women Engineers. And we thought, okay, well, we're done with that. That's all we need to do. Well, I really do believe that building relationships, especially in our local community, is really, really key to getting the word out about the kind of work we do. And sometimes our work impacts one person, 5 people, 10 people. And you think, well, did we really make a difference? It matters to the people that you worked with. It matters to the people who you built relationships with. So again, the grassroots efforts, deliberate and targeted recruitment. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. In human resources, we do talk about challenges over the years. One is eliminating artificial barriers to employment, and a simple example of that is we have employee cafeterias. We have 3 of them in our organization. So when we have open positions for food service generalists, for dishwashers, we put ads in the newspaper. And you might think, well, really? Who looks in the paper for jobs anymore? An artificial barrier, we're eliminating that because people in that income level may not have access to a computer. They might not own a computer. So we try to be really mindful when we reach out and do recruiting. What's our audience? Who do we want to attract to our jobs? And then facilitating reasonable accommodation during the hiring process and with our current employees. So we had, a number of years ago, a contract administrator position. We had an applicant who got called in for an interview, and he called me and he said, well, I need to tell you something. I was injured in Iraq, and I can't sit for long periods of time. So would it be okay if I stood up part of the time during the interview? Well, of course. How is that going to impact anything? But it made us aware of his requirements. We accommodated him, and he came in. Sorry to say we did not hire him, but we are at least aware of his situation. And then another piece that I think is really critically important is educating our hiring supervisors. And so over time, believe it or not, in a big organization like ours, once in a great while, the supervisor knows who they want to hire. They've kind of got blinders on. They think, if I can just get to that person at the end of this process, I'm good. And to me, that kind of shuts down the whole process. You need to be very open-minded when you have candidates come in for interviews, and this is a point I drive home over and over and over. You know, in our population here in Boulder, you can imagine, largely white, and so I see these processes over the years, not a lot of diversity. And so I've sort of had to do things outside the hiring process to, I guess, scratch that itch I have to really help people have access to our workforce. So I talk about grassroots efforts. In the spring of 2011, my supervisor said, why don't you call the local workforce office and see if they have a veterans representative? Well, they did. It's a gentleman named Jim Moore. He's a Vietnam vet, very, very committed to helping veterans in our local area find positions. And so in brainstorming with him, you know, what can UCAR do to help with an unemployment problem among our veterans? He told us that at that time, there were about 6,000 unemployed veterans in our county. That number just stuck with me. I couldn't believe there were that many people looking for work. And so we said, well, we've got a beautiful conference facility up at our Center Green location. Why don't we throw a job fair? So we started in 2011. We called 14 local companies. We made sure that they had real jobs that they were hiring for. We did publicity through our through our communications department. I believe they sent out 55 press releases to media outlets. The first year I was so excited, I turned on my local news, Channel 9, and they were talking about our job fair. So we got, for the first year, we had, I believe, about 75 to 80 participants. You know, when he said 6,000, I thought, we're gonna have 1,000 people in this space. Well, I think for the first year, about 80 individuals came in. I know of 3 that were hired. That isn't a huge number, but it mattered to those 3 people. The other thing that we did, Jim went out to the veteran service organizations, the VFW and so forth, kind of hat in hand and said, can you donate a little money to feed the employers who are coming to this fair? So that was another piece of it. We invited employers to come in, they got fed. Our event services staff did a great job of coming up with a nice buffet. And for just a little bit of effort, it really didn't take very much work, and we've got this annual event. So in 2012, I had established a relationship with the local division of vocational rehab. We thought, why don't we fold in the people with disabilities? There's some crossover there, certainly disabled veterans. And so the second year, we had to be very mindful of, you know, do we have enough handicap parking? What do we do to make sure people can get there? We actually had a woman call us from Longmont and say, I'm blind, I don't know the Longmont bus system very well, I missed my bus. We sent somebody out to get her, to bring her in to the fair. So we just tried to really use staff who are either veterans themselves or sympathetic to the cause, and we had quite a few volunteers step forward to help us out. So as you know, and I got this from a website, the Veterans Service Organization, I believe, veterans do add value in the workplace in terms of teamwork, committed high-level performance, a lot of self-confidence, being organized and disciplined, having a strong work ethic, good cross-functional skills, and good problem solvers. And one thing, when I talk to veterans, I know I've seen a number of veteran resumes over the years. Sometimes they speak military, and I'm looking at these words on their resume like, I don't understand this. So part of our challenge is to get them to use civilian verbiage in their resumes so that we understand what they did and how it applies to the jobs that they're applying for. In terms of relationship building, as I mentioned, we've worked with Workforce Boulder extensively, the Colorado Division of Vocational Rehab. I'll skip connections for a minute. The Bolt Center at the CU Engineering School, I just have to mention them because when I first started in HR, they had a minority in engineering program, they had a women in engineering program. I never really was able to connect very well with those populations. They combined them, I think within the last 7 or 8 years. It's called Broadening Opportunities for Leadership and Development. And so they have put together women, minorities, women, minorities, low income, and first generation students. They have a marvelous program that involves all kinds of tutoring. They've got a dorm that's actually devoted to the engineering students. So our high altitude observatory, which are solar physicists, said, well, could we do a targeted recruitment at the Bold Center to increase women and minorities in our lab? And I checked with our attorney, because that's what we do in HR, And she said, well, you've got student opportunities all year long for all students. And so, this is a little risk, but you know what? We're going to focus our efforts on the bold students. So this is the third year that we've had students, and we've had phenomenal young women, and one Hispanic young man comes to want mine. Just excellent, excellent students from this program to come work and get a glimpse of what we do, come in and really do an outstanding job for us in HAL. So I would like to say probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, I got a call from Connection Staffing. I didn't know what they were. Found out that they are half a traditional temp agency. They match temp workers to local employers. The other half, they work really hard with disabled folks, with people actually coming out of prison, and with veterans. They called me and they said, I know you do computing, I know you do supercomputing there. We have a young woman who is beginning community college studying computer science. She is autistic. She's high-functioning autistic on the Asperger's scale. And would you have an opportunity for her? And I was kind of intrigued. I thought, tell me more about that. So I arranged an interview, asked around a little bit. We have an IT department in UCAR. So I arranged an interview for her, and I'll call her Rose. She came in and interviewed with our director of IT, with one of our top managers. She had her dad there for a little moral support. She had actually the connections person and 2 social workers. She had a lot of support that day. And Rose came in and did an interview, and I don't speak computing, so I'm not quite sure what she's talking about, but I'm an HR person, so I was looking at body language. And, I saw eyebrows go up. She was talking about, I've imaged computers, I've written code. I saw jaws starting to drop, and I thought, good. She is who they say she is. And so, this individual over time has really added value to our workplace. And so Brian Bevert, who's been taking pictures today, we are co-PIs on a proposal that was funded by the NCAR Diversity Committee. And our goal is to build a pipeline of students who are on the autism spectrum to come in and do computer work. And I should really have Brian explain a lot more about that, because there's great attention to detail, focus, a great ability in the computing field. Here we go. So as I said, Rose is a community college student with a strong computer aptitude, and I think that's understating it, right, Brian? She's phenomenal. Initially, when we brought her in, and you might check with your local divisions of vocational rehab, because here in Boulder, they have what they call a paid work experience. So for the first 300 hours, Rose was funded through the DVR. They paid her minimum wage, which I guess for a college student isn't too bad. And we learned about her, she learned about us, and then we had to have some meetings to talk about funding. In the winter of 2012, she worked at the IT help desk. And the supervisor she had there, when I called her and said, gosh, what do you think? Are you open to doing this? She said, this is just an honor to get to work with someone like this. So we just have phenomenal employees who are really very open to hiring people who are different than we are. One thing that Lynn, the supervisor, said about Rose was that, she doesn't know the meaning of take your time. She doesn't get that. She's so efficient and so accurate, and she just marches through projects. And I keep telling her, I'm going to run out of things for you to do. You need to slow down. I'm not sure Rose knows how to slow down. She is very, very methodical in her work, very focused. And so I think it was in about last spring, 2013, Brian stepped up with the help of Kristen Mooney in Sizzle. And how many photos were you archiving?
Thousands.
Thousands, that's what I was going to say. Thousands and thousands of photos. This is pretty repetitive work, pretty boring work. And the first part of it, Rose was tasked with looking at several photos from, say, a computing conference and choosing the best photos. And that morphed into more complex work having to do with Photoshop, I believe. Brian called me one day and he's like, okay, Rose has taught me a lot more about Photoshop than I've been able to teach her. She knows a lot. Well, word has gotten out about Rose and her abilities. And so this summer, I got a call from the UCAR president's office. We have some money. We've heard about this woman. Can you please have her come over and work with us? And so Rose came in, and I'll talk a minute about what her interview was like with that group. But they had about 20 web pages. They're all frantically busy in the president's office. They needed someone to move web content into Drupal pages. And so Rose knows how to code, and she's not intimidated by getting behind the scenes and looking at the code. So I think they had estimated maybe 6 half days of work for her to get 20 pages moved. Well, it took her 3 half days. And while she was in there looking at this content, she said, oh, you know what? There's some grammatical errors in here. Do you want me to fix those? Oh, and by the way, some of the formatting is a little wonky. Do you mind if I fix that? And they were like, go for it. So when I talked to her supervisor the other day, she said, you know, the biggest challenge is finding enough work for her to do. We've got project upon project upon project. She's so efficient, so accurate that we wish we had 10 of her. I did ask, you know, compared to other interns you've had, is this experience any different? She said, not really. You know, any new intern, any student coming into a professional workplace is going to need some mentoring and is going to need, you know, some help and some adjustment. So I know with Rose, they've had to be very deliberate about, okay, you work an hour and a half, and at 2:30 you take a break for 15 minutes, and then you come back. Well, one day she didn't come back. They had to dock her pay by a half hour. She was busy talking to the receptionist at the front desk. So here's what we've learned about reasonable accommodation with Rose. It was very critical for us to understand all of this person's issues. In addition to being on the autism spectrum, she has the condition, and I can never pronounce it, but she cannot recognize faces. And so when she first came to work with us and I'd see her, I would be, you know, hey, Rose, it's Nancy. Well, after a while, she kind of learned by voices, I think, and she also can see people's auras. So she told Brian, he had a raspberry, I believe, aura. When he gets stressed, it has little sparks flying off of it. One day I saw her in our building, I hadn't seen her for a long time, and she said, hi, Nancy. And I said, wait a minute, how'd you know it was me? And she was like, oh, I recognized your aura. So it's been intriguing, to say the least. We do have a supervisor prep meeting, so I can just explain some of the issues, some of the necessary accommodations. I need to understand and know our organization. I need to understand which groups and individuals might be open to hosting this young woman. I think Terry has put her hand up to say, I'm next, right? And then we try to set reasonable goals, as with any student, and then we try to be flexible. So here are a few disability statistics. People with disabilities comprise the largest minority group and the only group any of us can become a member of at any time. People with disabilities represent the single largest minority group seeking employment. Over 65% of working age adults with disabilities, are unemployed. And among people with disabilities who are working, nearly 1/3 earn less than $15,000 a year. And I will just let you read through this quickly. Quite a wide range of disabilities. So in HR, because we are a federal contractor, we are required to produce an affirmative action plan every year, and we always strive to hire people so that our workforce mirrors our population. And every year we come up a little bit short in certain areas where we need to work a little harder to bring in women and minorities. So these are the areas in which we want to mirror our population. So the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, the OFCCP, does oversee our hiring practices. As of March 2014, we are now required to track our hiring of veterans and people with disabilities, include those in our affirmative action plan. So we like to think we've been proactive in this type of recruitment rather than reactive. We're pretty excited about this. Enough said about that. So in terms of next steps, we need to do a better job of quantifying our job fair results by collecting more detailed metrics about who's interviewed and who's hired. We need to provide training to our supervisors about working with the ASD population, and that's actually part of the proposal that Brian and I are on. And we are going to partner with local community colleges to recruit ASD computer science students. Ideally so that Rose will be mentoring another student that comes in behind her. We hope to continue that. We want to continue our grassroots efforts. Oh. Are there any questions? Wendy.